Welcome everybody to the second event of Mission Beyond. I'm Cain, CEO and co-founder of Red Badger, and for those of you joining for the first time, Red Badger are a digital consultancy that helps very large complex organisations with digital innovation and transformation. Mission Beyond is inspired by economist Mariana Mazzucato's mission-based approach. Now, missions are a stimuli for innovation to tackle the major issues facing society, the environment around us, and the possibility of developing a prosperous, equal economy. Now, Mission Beyond is Red Badger's social impact programme that aims to facilitate cross-sector collaboration to help solve broader challenges in society and to develop a community of impact-driven leaders who have a desire to make a difference. We had an amazing reaction to our launch event back in June, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this second event with some incredible speakers and a brilliant group of people joining us. And I hope this will be an inspiring and worthwhile hour and a half of your afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The theme of this event is anchored to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 10, reduce inequalities. And our focus related to that goal is social mobility, which is a huge global problem and is really close to our hearts at Red Badger. And together, we can start to form ripples that turn into waves to have an impact in this space. And today is the start of that journey. Mission Beyond provides a platform that's focused on action and enables you, the community, to have impact. And it's not just a forum to meet and chat. And I'm extremely excited to welcome some amazing speakers today and who will educate us on what we can do both on our own and together. Before we start, just a quick bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's event and we may use some of the material for the benefit of Mission Beyond community after the event. But you can ask questions throughout the webinar in Slido. So you can see this QR code here. You can take a picture of that. You'll also find the Slido in the chat, and we'll have about 30 to 40 minutes at the end of our end of today for our panelists to answer your questions. So we have an amazing agenda today, and I'm really honoured to have Professor Moss Kanter with us today. Professor Kanter will be talking us through the key elements of her latest book, Think Outside of the Building: How Advanced Leaders Can Change the World One Smart Innovation at a Time. After Professor Kanter, we have Barry Matthews, and Barry's the co-founder of the Employers Social Mobility Alliance, or Esma for short. And for this mission, Red Badger have partnered with Esma as their digital partner, and Barry will be taking us through Esma and its vision. Then we have our very own Sam Taylor, a Red Badger Tech Director, and he'll be talking us through what we've done in partnership with Esma, what is next, and how this community can get involved. So it's an honour for me to introduce our first speaker today, a legend in the fields of leadership and responsible capitalism, Professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter. Professor Kanter is the co-founder of the Harvard University Advanced Leadership Initiative, which help experienced leaders at the top of their fields apply their skills to national and global challenges. I read her latest and 20th book, Think Outside the Building: How Advanced Leaders Can Change the World One Smart Innovation at a Time, back in February when it first came out, and I was blown away by it. And it's deeply relevant to what we're trying to achieve with Mission Beyond, and is a must read for any impact-driven leader. The behaviours, skills and sensibilities of leaders, how they need to collaborate in coalitions, to start ripples and turn them into waves on the road to impact, is all covered in the book. So thank you, Professor Kanter, for being here. I'll hand over to you now to share your insights and educate us on how we can cultivate our skills as a community and collaborate across organisations and sectors to have impact on the grand challenges of our times. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. This is my pleasure, and thank you, Cain, so much for the work you do and for that incredible book endorsement. I'm very grateful. I am talking to you today from my home, my new remote office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not far from the Harvard campus, but we're discouraging anybody from going to their offices. And this is our Harvard Business School standard virtual background, which is a little bland, but I guess it does the trick. I'm delighted to talk to you, and it makes me feel full of joy and happiness to have this opportunity. But in fact, we're at a time of great difficulties, challenges. We all know that. The global pandemic is only one of many challenges we face. In my book, on the first page of the first full chapter, I rattle off a list of the problems that are going to make a difference for our lives if we don't solve them. So I do mention global pandemics flying to us on airplanes. Some people said, oh, I was so prescient, but it wasn't hard to notice that it had been happening through the years. In fact, I would go to Asia frequently when SARS was popping up, and I learned to avoid shaking hands and washing my hands a lot. So we've known about this. We've known about the climate change crisis. We certainly know that inequality has been growing in some places or simply not changing, even though we have, for example, in the 20th century, made the biggest advances in health ever, almost doubling life expectancy over that century, except that within a few blocks of each other in major cities, there are districts where the difference in life expectancy is still 20 years or more because of inequality, including in education and health, in the ability to own property, accumulate wealth, and so forth. So these problems are actually the problems that millennials say on global surveys bother them the most. And these are problems that we have to do something about urgently. But I was attending too many dinner parties accompanied by fine wines. Hold this, so fine wine. I have to learn how to hold these with the virtual background. Fine wines, and that's not a typo. Wines, W-H-I-N-E-S, meaning the complaining cry and not the alcoholic beverage. People like to talk about these things, complain about them, decry them, but it's much harder to stimulate people to do anything about them. And in fact, whining is depressing, it's demoralizing, passivity is depressing, but activism is energizing. And so when we founded the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard, in all the work I've been doing, it has all been designed to activate and energize people to do something about problems, often one action, one step, one initiative at a time. Very big problems don't get solved in one bold global stroke. We know that doesn't happen. They get solved because of lots of innovators on the ground, inside companies, outside companies, within communities who decide to do something about the problems. And so I tell the stories of many of those people, some famous, many not famous, many accomplished but not famous, and how they have made a difference in the world. So I'm going to give you, I just gave you a sample of my bumper stickers. I'm going to give you 5 bumper stickers that run through the major points that I hope you'll take away about what it means to make a difference in the world, how you can do it. So the first is, and it is the title of my book, Think Outside the Building. Okay, you can see that the virtual background wants to get rid of everything I'm showing here, but think outside the building. What I mean by the building, the structures that confine us, the sectors, the silos, the systems that we live in, the unquestioned assumptions. No wonder we haven't solved some of the problems that I rattled off, because we often think about them in narrow and conventional ways. We often think about them in terms that dominant groups have established, and we think of them as being owned by certain professions and certain buildings. But we know, we're learning, that health is not the hospital. Health is a function of so many things beyond hospitals. By the time hospitals see people, if they see them at all, it's often after accumulated problems, many coming from inequalities. We know that the pandemic tends to be affecting Black and brown people more than others. That's now scientifically established by many studies. And so health isn't the hospital. We have to think about it much broadly. It's community access, it's economic circumstances, it's the quality of education. And education is not the classroom or the school building. In fact, if anything, the pandemic is showing us we'd better learn to do education in a much broader way. Education is now digital, it's at home, it's in small clusters. We have to reinvent our assumptions. Of course, classrooms are important. I miss my classrooms desperately. I'd rather be in a classroom with people than on a screen. But we have to learn to add all of these tools to make a difference. And so education is parents, it's economic circumstances, it's nutrition. All of these problems are intertwined. And when you come to a big problem like climate change, it's not only not a building, it's not owned by any one sector, any one entity. In fact, there's a range of people, all of whom claim responsibility for climate change, and often they're at war with one another. For example, government ministries versus NGOs or nonprofit organizations who think they're noble, they're the ones who have the right answer. And then that means leaving out business because business is the enemy. So what you have in these complex, multifaceted social system problems, you often have warring factions over who owns the problem. You have narrow thinking, and we have to get people out of their buildings. So one way we get out of the buildings is we dream, is we think about the world as it could be, not necessarily the world as it is, and we get out of the places in which we're comfortable. We travel, we see things, and if we can't travel physically, we might travel virtually. It's by talking to people who are different from you. That's why diversity is so important. It's not that we just substitute one body type for another body type. It's that we want people with a range of experiences to learn from. And so for these big problems, we have to dream bigger than we are. Dream bigger than you are. Whatever you're dreaming, make it bigger and bolder. After all, it takes as much time and energy to dream small as it does to dream big. And so let's just take climate change for a moment. A German banker who was ultimately based in London, working for major banks, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, was very concerned about climate change. He's just one guy, but he had worked in project finance, and he had seen, for example, when they were financing an undersea cable under the Pacific, exactly how much plastic there was floating in the Pacific, how many problems there were in the Pacific. And he cared deeply about oceans. He had grown up on the North Sea. He decided to do something we always tell people they shouldn't do. You know that saying, you can't boil the ocean? Well, Torsten Thiele decided to boil the ocean, or actually stop it from boiling. Not to boil the ocean means don't take anything on so big that you couldn't possibly accomplish it. But that's not true. If you settle for less than the big goal, you might not accomplish anything. So he said, I'm going to do something about the oceans. And after all of his travels and discussions with people who are often very different in countries all over the world, going to numerous meetings, there are thousands of groups around the world and conventions and convenings of people interested in climate change. They may be virtual now, but they're still happening. And he realized a gap. When you dream big and you care about solving a problem, you have to be attentive to the gaps. What's missing? What is not contained in the building? And he realized that there was no financial perspective. exactly for that reason I talked about earlier. The nonprofits didn't want to talk to business. Business was evil. They were the enemy. Governments were very jealous of their territory, even though no one owns the oceans. You only own a little bit offshore, and then the rest, there's no sovereignty for oceans. And he realized this big gap. And so he decided his dream was, we need a World Bank for oceans. A big idea. Well, in 5 or 6 years, he has managed to put finance in the equation. He has helped The Economist magazine with contests for the best business ideas that will help save the oceans. He knows the people who designed the plastic shoes that Adidas made out of that marine plastic washed up in the Pacific. He has encouraged and energized a new point of view. He has gotten bankers at the table with NGOs to talk about common interests, insurance companies to talk together in Bermuda, where a lot of them are based, about their losses because we don't have undersea sensors. We can't predict. We all depend on the oceans for food, for shipping, and yet we had not seen a major ingredient. So he dreamed bigger than he was, and he is making things happen because he is building cross-sector, multi-stakeholder coalitions, and that's my next bumper sticker. It doesn't take a village, that's the African proverb. Well, yeah, it takes a village, but a village is too small. It takes more than a village, it takes a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder coalition. Lots of villages, lots of sectors working together. And in the education space, for example, and given that you're going to be talking about social mobility, one of the, a couple of the stories that I talk about in my book of organizations that are already scaling, trying to do something about education for greater equality. One of them is an NGO started in the US, also very active in the UK. It's now in London, Birmingham, and Manchester, called City Year. And City Year is getting young people to spend a year, their City Year, tutoring, mentoring kids in at-risk children in at-risk schools, and helping them learn to stay in school and graduate, because the high school dropout crisis is one that prevents people from going on to be college ready and to go to college. And that was one big cross-sector multi-stakeholder coalition. In fact, they were just a little community program in Boston, and then they would show it off to people because Massachusetts is next to New Hampshire, where the first presidential primaries are held in the US. They invited, in 1992, they invited every presidential candidate to come visit. And every single one turned them down, except one, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was elected president and immediately worked with City Year and others to create a law about national service and a government function. So now we have a little program. It had corporate partners. It had young people who were in the core that did the tutoring and mentoring. And now we have national funding and government support. Cross-sector, multi-stakeholder, 30 years later, has grown to 29 sites in the US, 3 in the UK, 2 in South Africa. And we could do more internationally, but there's so much to do in the US. And it's now a force for changing education, because when you build that coalition, you don't just keep your own program going. That's inside the building thinking. We start a cause, we start a nonprofit, we start a corporate responsibility effort, and we want to grow and have impact through our effort. No. What City Year and others do is they want to have impact by growing the entire ecosystem, by encouraging many other groups to join them in a common cause. And so they are now having education improvement teams in every city in which they operate that consists of the education establishment, It consists of the nonprofits serving education, and City Year is a convener, not the central element. One other example that I think is terrific because it's a new partnership and it's now starting to spread around Europe. IBM started it, a major corporation. IBM has always been interested in education, and IBM is now responsible for, I call it reinventing high school. High school or secondary school was basically public high school or secondary school, I should say. And I know that the word public school means something different in the UK than it does in the US, but I'm talking about truly public, free, government-sponsored 12 years of education for everybody. Was invented in Massachusetts, spread throughout the United States, but yet it hasn't been reinvented for well over 100 years. IBM was very concerned about jobs of the future and also all the people left behind in the digital economy. And so they created a cross-sector multi-stakeholder coalition to reinvent that. They have invented with school districts, government school systems, and other employers something called the 6-year high school. 6 years, 12 years, your 4 years of secondary school plus 2 years of, we call it community college or a junior college, 2 years of college, all in one degree, 6 years of high school. Now, when I first heard that idea, I thought it was insane. Personally, I hated high school. I couldn't wait to get out and go to college. I kept begging my parents to let me go to one of the colleges that you could start in 11th grade, not having graduated. But IBM did it, 6 years. And the students who are in the first cohorts, who are largely from at-risk backgrounds, they're people of color. Many of the first cohort in a 6-year program, just showing how much talent there is, graduated with both degrees in 4 years. And now one of the people we talk about a lot in the first cohort has a $50,000 a year. What is that in euros? Or in pounds now? A big job at IBM, and is studying for his 4-year college degree, and he's probably going to go ahead and get a doctorate with all those tech skills. That's a reinvention made possible because a company in partnership with, first of all, the K through 12, the secondary school, government school system, the 2-year college system, they all had to partner. They had never talked to each other, pretty separate. And then employers. IBM was soon joined by employers whose names you'd know. Cisco and Microsoft and Verizon and others. And in cities where they did not have a critical mass of very big employers, the employer's role was to send tutors, offer internships, and promise the graduates a job interview. Not a job, but an interview. But that was such an incentive that they have very high rates of attendance, and it's considered a huge success. President Obama mentioned it 3 times in his State of the Union address. It has been growing all over the world. Australia, now France is doing something like it with IBM's help. Cross-sector, multi-stakeholder, start with one, start with a pilot, gather others, get others to join you because they will have an equal role and equal stake in it. That's really important. It's not owned by anybody. Yes, IBM provides a lot of the support and the playbook, but in cities where I started to say there's no one big employer who could take it on, for example, more rural areas, there are hospitals, for example. Hospitals need tech schools. So they would create a collaboration of the hospitals and of smaller employers to be the mentors and tutors, offer the job interview, and tailor the curriculum to getting skills that would help people in the future. And as I said earlier, our poster child graduate, Radcliffe Sattler, he's as interested in the liberal arts, but he has tech skills. And he has a job, a high-paying job, and he's going to get a doctorate someday out of a poor background in a poor part of the city. I'm very excited and proud of those efforts. Some of them start even smaller with individuals who decide they want to make a difference. For example, Mary Louise and Bruce Cohen. I love talking about the Cohens. They're both lawyers, very, very accomplished people in their own careers, but they decided they had to solve the Syrian refugee crisis. Now that's dreaming bigger than you are. That's kind of a big problem. They traveled, they talked to people at UNICEF and the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, and they began to see that there were many skilled people in the refugee camps. And you know, we think of refugees as ragtag people who are on boats across the Mediterranean, desperate to get into Europe, and they're a problem. Well, they saw these same refugees as often an opportunity, that there were many people with high skills, highly educated, who were eager to work. And there were many employers in parts of the world who couldn't fill certain jobs because they weren't attractive to millennials, like jobs in rural manufacturing areas or jobs in certain kinds of skilled trades. Well, now, a few years later, their organization called Talent Beyond Boundaries, something small that two people started, now places skilled refugees in Canada, Australia. They're working on Morocco. The US is a problem at the moment, even though they had a State Department grant to begin with. You know, we have to get over some problems in the United States before we're receptive. But other countries are receptive. They're now partnering with a very big global NGO in the UK to grow this entity. So first of all, this is dreaming bigger than you are and thinking outside the building, because refugees have been seen as a humanitarian crisis. We give them a little money, try to place them somewhere, otherwise they're a problem. They saw it as a solution to a labor market problem. Think about how that flip in thinking outside conventional channels, opened opportunities. So they've placed butchers who are skilled at cutting certain esoteric cuts of meat in Australia. They have placed people with high skills in certain kinds of manufacturing in rural Canada. And those people are delighted to be there, even though that manufacturer couldn't attract young people from the cities. He is now one of the biggest advocates. So their network of supporters and partners has grown. They thought of it a little bit in the beginning as an Uber for refugees. That is a matching platform. You had employers on the one side, you had people with skills on the other side. Let's get them together. That's outside the building, cross-sector, multi-stakeholder thinking. My next bumper sticker is one of my most famous, if I do say so myself, that it's Cantor's Law. I call it Cantor's Law. Everybody should have a law named after them, even if you have to name it yourself. Cantor's Law is that everything can seem like a failure in the middle. Everything in the middle. You know, we love beginnings. We love the announcement. And in corporate social responsibility, a lot of the attention goes to the announcement. Aren't they generous? Isn't that wonderful? Or maybe to the first accomplishments. It's just the middle that's hard work. It's the middle in which your alliance can fray. It's the middle in which things are disrupted because of unexpected obstacles. So one of the people stories I like to talk about in my book is Richard Fahey, and his thought partner, who started an entity to bring affordable alternative energy to West Africa. That means solar cells. And by the way, because everything is connected in a system, this is a big systems problem for education, for example. If there is no electricity, and 97% of the people in Liberia, for example, were off the electric grid. If there's no electricity and you don't have a generator, which most people don't, then kids can't read at night. So how do they keep up with their schoolwork? Parents often have to walk miles and miles to where there is a generator to charge a cell phone. So this problem of affordable energy and green energy, which is great for the climate, is also a problem for education. It's a problem for health, nutritious food. Well, Liberia, for example, is on the coast. There's a lot of fish. Fish is full of protein, very healthy, but that fish couldn't get to the interior because of no refrigeration. So suddenly the solar cells were a solution to a health and nutrition problem too. But in the middle, actually almost from the beginning, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And that's what you have to think about. Anything that you do that's new or different, an awful lot of things you didn't expect are going to go wrong. First of all, the first batch of solar cells arrived on the docks in Monrovia. Not a single one worked. They had been ordered from China via a Danish engineer. None of them worked. So you have to be innovative, flexible, creative, even from the beginning. So they found there were a lot of kids, young men, working under cars on a famous street in Monrovia, fixing cars. And they said, you know, certain car parts are a lot like these solar batteries. And they recruited the street kids to work on repairing the solar batteries. They did. And suddenly they had a new workforce that was also bringing jobs to poor people. Then they face other problems. There was a little embezzlement. It's a relationship-oriented culture. So somebody's relative was hired who did some embezzlement. They solved that problem. The biggest middle they faced was Ebola. So this wasn't the first pandemic to start disrupting everybody's lives, Ebola. And so Monrovia was going to shut down. And so what their company, Liberia Energy Network, did was they sent the workers home with 2 months of pay for the first month so that they could buy food for their family and be well stocked. They thought about their workers first. And because of that, and because of their creative response to the middle, they had a very loyal workforce, all of which wanted to come back and work for them. And they caught the attention of certain large multinationals that decided they would rather buy the energy from this values-oriented company than from the corrupt government system. And so suddenly they had a new market. They're suddenly having to supply big batteries for the big energy needs of big companies working in Liberia. And they have pivoted, they have grown their businesses to solve all kinds of problems and with new customers because they mastered the messy middles. They did it because they dreamed bigger than they are. That is, they had a mission and values and a sense of purpose that was so important that they couldn't let it go. And those values extended to how they treated their workforce. They couldn't stop because they had partners. And when you have a cross-sector, multi-stakeholder coalition, you have partners you've promised something to. You don't suddenly say, oh no, it's way too hard, we're gonna stop. You have to find a creative way to keep going. They did that, and they're growing very successfully today because of what I call my final bumper sticker. Okay, the optimism of activism. I talked earlier about fine wines. Whining does nothing for us except make us depressed. But getting active, doing, finding something, however small, to start. I mean, you don't have to necessarily solve the biggest problem of the world, but I hope you'll dream about it. You don't necessarily have to start something that grows to many cities, many countries, although wouldn't that be nice? Instead, you simply have to get moving. This is a wonderful time in this awful pandemic. Wonderful because we have the time to reflect. And the time to stand back and think, when we come out of this, what kind of a world do we want? What do we want health to be? What do we want education to be? How do we want to treat the climate? How do we want to deal with racial injustice, gender justice? How do we truly want to become not a set of warring tribes, but one planet that takes care of all of us? So thank you, and I look forward to our dialogue.
Thank you, Professor Kanter. That was amazing. I'm sure many in this community will start to dream bigger than before after that talk. We also hope they'll be encouraged to get moving by getting involved in the next stages of Mission Beyond, which aims to facilitate the multi-stakeholder coalitions that you were talking about. We really appreciate you sharing your insights. Thank you for that. To the community, we've got a rare opportunity to have Professor Kanter answer our questions at the end of this session. So again, please feel free to add questions to Slido. The questions are already coming in, so we can see them coming in. You can also upvote in Slido, so feel free to go into there. And if you can't remember where the link is, it's in the chat if you want to go and find it. So what Professor Kanter was saying there is actually got a great connection, you know, talking about inequality, schools and education. It's got a great connection to what our next speaker has been doing. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Barry Matthews, co-founder of Esma. Barry's a truly passionate business leader whose actions are resulting in positive change in the social mobility space. Barry's co-founder of Esma, and we've invited him to tell us more about the problems people face with social mobility and how employers can help. Just in case you're thinking this is too hard, Barry manages to lead this alliance alongside his day job as SVP of General Counsel at Megit, which is a FTSE 250 aero defence company. Following Barry, we'll also demonstrate the work that Red Badger have been doing, helping with the digital side of Esma. But first, over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Cain, for having me today. And first of all, I'd say what a great honour it is to be on the same bill as Professor Kanter. She truly is the leader of my tribe, because what I believe in, she is basically written about for a number of years. And you know, it's about taking responsibility for society's complex issues and also looking to solve them through entrepreneurialism and collaboration. One of the such issues is social mobility. So one such issue is social mobility, and for me, it's personal. So I take you back to when I was 16 years old, and I was full of ambition in the sense that I wanted to go to university. I was the first generation of my family to go to university, if I actually indeed got there. And I sat in front of my careers advisor, and I said to him, well, look, I want to go to university, and I think I want to study law. I wanted to study law, unfortunately, not down to this desire to right the wrongs of social injustices. It's because I'd watched LA Law and they had really nice suits, and I didn't want to be poor because we lived in pretty much abject poverty most of my childhood. But the response to that kind of desire and that ambition, well, this was his exact words: people from your council estate don't go to university. As for law, you'll see the inside of a prison cell, but that's the closest you'll get to a career in law. Now, obviously, very inspirational words, and really kind of put the fire in my belly to prove him wrong. But I think, you know, that's why social mobility is important to me. But I think the more interesting question is actually, what does it mean to me? And why do I believe it's important at societal level? And then we'll come on to Esma and the reasons why I think that as a project is important for us to do in working with Red Badger. So the concept of social mobility is often criticised. It's a lot of people will refer to it as simply being a quest to add working class kids to the elite and not addressing, therefore, the underlying social inequality in society. But that's not a definition I subscribe to. My definition really focuses on the movement. So taking individuals from low income backgrounds and enabling them to move towards their career goals uninhibited by their socio-economic background. So in short, your background shouldn't impact your future. So it's not just about kids from council estates becoming lawyers. Now, for those in the US, a council estate is a social housing project. So yes, nobody thought I was going to do anything, and hopefully I've managed to achieve something in my short time on this earth. So why Esma? Well, Esma is an alliance. It's not a thing. It will never be an entity. We don't need more things which need more funding, but then competing for that money, which is one of the big problems that the third sector suffers from in terms of addressing social issues. So Esma is an idea that was born out of my frustration about the lack of joined up action when we see organs of state, business and third sector trying to combat issues relating to coming from a low income. And I saw this at ground level over the last 5 years. I set up a charity back in 2017, and prior to that, it was a scheme. And the whole focus of this charity is about getting a coalition of action around providing work experience and lifetime career coaching to individuals from low-income backgrounds. A lot of this focus on getting people into work, but not thinking about the imposter syndrome. I think it took me until I was 41 to feel really comfortable in my own skin in the working environment. I think people forget that because you don't necessarily have the tools that, say, my children will have in terms of the support network around them. So the Social Mobility Business Partnership kicked off at 2017. I did this whilst working as a general counsel at the broadcaster ITV and also as a NED at our regulatory body for solicitors in the UK. And I think, you know, having read Professor Kanter's book, we don't necessarily need to wait until we retire and free up time. I think we can do things right now. And I think doing things right now is really important, not least for the way in which you as a leader present yourself to your teams and whether or not they can believe that you care about them as an individual, their development, when in fact you don't give a crap about the community around you. So as a tool in leadership, if you want to be utterly selfish about this and you don't have a burning passion to change something, it will benefit you as a leader to embrace the principles that Professor Kanter espouses in her book. So SMBPs, 150 different businesses, each sharing the heavy lifting, coming together to deliver work experience, and also creating a pool of coaches who can assist students throughout their careers. Now, we set up these franchises. We're effectively the McDonald's of law, of work experience provision. It's providing that operational glue to enable the spinning up of these weeks with 4 different businesses in the professional sports club. And we've set up in about 15, 16 cities across the UK, from Belfast to Bristol. But each and every time that we set something up, we look to see how we can collaborate. What local charities are already working there? Let's work with them to work with the students they've already identified. Why go in fresh? It's not a competition. Equally, we'll go to the businesses and get them to join together. So effectively, their only ask is a day's worth of content and some sandwiches. We'll then go out to the local authority and say, look, what other social impact programs have you got going on? How can we build a bridge between you and local businesses beyond the week that we're helping to set up? Now, there are some amazing cities like Glasgow and Belfast who are really on point with this stuff. But there are other cities who are literally walking around as ships passing in the night. And so for me, I was just born out, absolutely frustrating. My God, if you put this here, this here, this here, and people talk together and work together, the impact would be immense. So whilst we were cracking on and building the franchise and building more clusters and introducing more businesses to each other, I kind of parked an idea in my head that something needed to be done to tackle this, to kind of give us a route map on where things were, how things worked, how they could work better, i.e. bringing what we as business professionals do in our everyday life to create operational efficiency and applying it to a social issue. Now, that's essentially what Esma is. So what is it? Well, one thing I just need to say, because it just popped up, one of my alumni and my mentee, Mohammed, today has just got a training contract with Hogan Lovells, just found out in the last 5 minutes. So he's one of the alumni of the scheme, and he'll be in the Q&A later. So I'm just bubbling over about that. So we'll hear from him. Sorry, that just flashed up, so I just had to say it. So vision for Esma. What is Esma? It's an alliance of organisations in the same way as the SMBP is. It's about working together to identify the problem in the first instance. It's quite clear that the information that you would need to understand in your disposal to understand the issue of low income, specifically in the UK to begin with, but this could branch out, is in all the different places. And I know where it is because I've been doing this for a long time now. You go to the DFE site, you go to the Sutton Trust, you go to the Social Mobility Commission, the Careers and Enterprise Company, the National Citizens Service, all quangos, businesses and individual reports, the Bridge Group, working with various corporates to deliver their own specific reports on a different nuance of the economy. But people haven't got the time to navigate those areas and really understand it. So first point, of course, in order to solve a problem, you need to understand what it is. And so Esma's first mission, which Red Badger has so beautifully helped us achieve, which will be disclosed to the world next week, is to create that wraparound understanding in a digital form of what low income means and what impact it has on you in terms of achieving your career goals. Secondly, we wanted to then surface all of the great initiatives that were working and enable people to stop reinventing the wheel if they wanted to do something in this space. We also wanted then to use the operational acumen that the people we were recruiting, some 300 individuals so far, and there's room for more because we're looking to, we are looking to boil the bloody ocean on this. And so the more people can help us with their little pans to boil it, the better. So ultimately, we're going to operation review what these initiatives we've mapped are doing and how we can make them more effective. And then the icing on the cake for us will be the creation of an incubator fund, which will then utilize that money to play that as a license fee to holders of best practice. And we can then take that material and then push it out on a Creative Commons basis to other organizations of a similar nature elsewhere in the UK. So we start to cross-fertilize best practice. So that's our ambition, and dream big. And I've always subscribed to dreaming big. I still think I might one day dance with the Royal Ballet, but you know what? I'm not going to be dissuaded from that anytime soon. So dreaming big is great, but it's how do you then take that idea and that ambition and make it real? Well, you need one thing, it turns out, just one. It's a badger. Who knew? And preferably a red one, because I must say, working Red Badger has been an absolute joy. The way in which the team have embraced the idea, and actually from the starting point, it wasn't simply, this is a digital design agency, this is what you want to execute, we'll build you a website. The starting point was a discovery exercise that went and started at the emotional level of, okay, who are the people that you want to see this, and what emotional response do you want to elicit from them? And let's work backwards from that, and then we'll then, forget about your preconceptions about how this should be laid out or work. Let's think about what you're trying to achieve in terms of the emotional response and the call to arms. And we go deep into the kind of psychology of the individuals who would be using this site. And it was amazing. It's possibly the best week of my working life. The energy, the passion, the focus on social change was just, it was marvelous, absolutely marvelous. And I must give a special mention though to my fellow bearded Barry, who you'll meet in a bit, who donated his 6 months sabbatical from PwC to getting out and meeting people and understanding the initiatives we needed to map, working with the Red Badger team as well. Mainly I was inputting, Barry was driving it. And it's just been such a wonderful, reinvigorating project to work on. And I feel very lucky to be a part of it. And huge thanks from me. Over back to you, Cain.
Thanks so much, Barry, for sharing your personal journey there. It's shocking to hear what your careers advisor once said to you. But also thanks for sharing the inspiring vision that Esma has already become, and I'm sure will become in the future. And I'm glad we could be a facilitator of your best working week. Yeah, thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce Sam Taylor, the Tech Director at Red Badger. Sam's dedicated the last 8 weeks, I think, about 8 weeks, leading a small Badger team in partnership with Esma to build the digital platform that Barry was just telling us about, to show employers what they can do to make a difference to the problem of social mobility. I'm also excited to announce that Sam's joined Esma as CTO alongside his day job as Red Badger Technical Director, so that he can continue to support their amazing work going forward. We're really leaning into this to make sure that we are able to have impact. Sam, over to you to take us through what we've done and what's next.
Thanks, Cain. So when we met the Barrys, I immediately knew that I wanted to understand more about social mobility. So I did some reading, and a few statistics caught my eye. By the time a child is at school age, if they're from a disadvantaged background, they're likely to be 4 to 5 months behind in reading, writing, and speaking. And that gap widens to 19 months by the end of school. And should they overcome that setback, then if they attain a professional career, compared to a more advantaged counterpart, they can expect 20% less pay. So this is a big problem. And the barriers we're talking about how many organizations working in the social mobility space were reinventing the wheel, simply because they don't know about each other. And we set to thinking about how we could help as a technology partner. A digital collaboration sets to increase the reach and the speed of the impact that Esma can have on social mobility. And we've been working together to create a web presence that makes available some research and is the beginning of a digital platform that we can develop further and that we can build a community around. I'm going to talk a bit about how we began, what we've built, and what's coming next. We began with some discovery activities. So these take the form of facilitated workshops, and they're really designed to get the team, set the team up for success in building the right thing. So at Red Badger, we have tried and tested tools, but what we're trying to do here is to work the team hard to identify which of their ideas bring user value. And when I say team, this is about project visionaries and subject matter expertise from the social mobility side, but also design, development, and delivery expertise from Red Badger. And we're all working together towards 3 key outcomes in discovery work. We're working towards a mission statement, which helps us align why we're all here. User personas, which help us characterize who we're doing this work for, and enough of a plan so we know where to start and what we hope to achieve by the end of the time we have. I'll talk a bit about how we got to a mission statement because that really frames how we work together. So the facilitator would have us all look at 4 areas. First, we'd think independently about this on our own, and then we would reconvene as a group to converge our ideas into a single mission statement. So we would think about what is the problem we're solving, who are we solving it for, and what are the behaviors we want to affect in the user community, and also our personal motivation for the work. So that's everything from purpose all the way down to personal motivation, which is a really great way for the team to get to know each other and to understand how each other's minds work. Which turned out to be particularly important because we started this work right about the height of the UK's coronavirus epidemic, which meant no co-location, and that in turn meant that we had to redesign some of our workshops. And those redesigned workshops with a combination of classwork, homework, and digital tooling work very well for some of our other constraints in that we're running a team which is an alliance of many organizations with people that have different calendars and in some cases day jobs. That enabled us to get to this mission statement together. We were here to create a shared understanding of what social mobility is and how to improve it together. So the improve it together part I'll come to towards the end, but the shared understanding part, which is essential if we're all to be singing from the same hymn sheet, and that really points to the research. Esma appointed the Bridge Group, who are specialist social mobility researchers, and they brought together research from dozens of organizations and arranged it into 5 topics, each of which corresponds to a life stage: early years, school years, further education, higher education, and working life. Within each of those sections, the research goes into considerable depth and breadth, and the team have done a brilliant job of breaking it up into discrete topics, which you can read relatively independently from each other. And that allows you to dip in and read about what you're interested in. It covers a lifetime of issues. So that means that as a school leader, you can dip in to read about how social mobility issues affect your intake or pupils while they're at school. As a higher education leader, you can dip in to understand similarly how it affects your university's intake or a student's life while at university. Or you, as a purpose-driven leader, can dip in to find out about how social mobility issues affect your current and potential employees. But these issues are complex. And not only are they complex within those life stages, there's also regional variation. So from one city to another, or from one local education authority to another, The way in which social mobility issues manifest and the extent to which they manifest varies. And that deserves dedicated research. So we want to extend that platform. We want to apply the same research structure on a regional basis. We want to map out all of the work and research going on across the UK to improve social mobility. This will aid work at a practical level, on a local level, to be informed by the expertise of the whole country. And to do that, we need your help. You can help by spreading the word about this issue, or by reaching out if you have time to coordinate research on a regional level, or provide resources for further development of the digital platform. So we've talked a bit about social mobility, and we've seen the start of the digital platform. But this is really your opportunity as a purpose-driven leader to reach out, improve social mobility, and reduce inequality in the UK. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. That's back to you, Cain.
Thank you so much, Sam. Such a great demonstration of how skills, collaboration and resources we have in the corporate world can actually translate to make a difference for societal challenges. And again, thank you, Barry, for sharing such a personal journey with us. We're thrilled to collaborate with you to start to make an impact. So today you will have heard the inspiring talk from Professor Kanter describing what you need to do as a leader if you do want to create waves on the path to impact. You need to step outside of the confines of your organisation, work with others and just move, start to innovate. A mission beyond is putting the foundations in place for you to do just that. It's all about action. We're making it as easy as possible for you to act. So action is how we get stuff done that actually results in impact. You will also have heard from Barry Matthews, alongside his day job at Megit, how he's invoked action from 150 UK businesses to help him achieve his mission of creating a fairer United Kingdom. And you will have heard about what Sam and the Badgers have been doing to help. The next steps involve you. We'd love to get you involved, and we'll be reaching out to discuss how you might be able to contribute to Esma and to Mission Beyond as a whole to help us to create a fairer United Kingdom and to impact society positively. If you are ready to act, we'd love to send you a copy of Professor Kanter's book. It's fantastic. At the end of this Zoom webinar, there'll be a survey, and if you can fill that out, and there's an address field on there, if you fill out the address field as well, we'll send you a copy of the book. Now, we have a fantastic and rare opportunity to have Professor Kanter and both of the co-founders of Esma, so Barry Matthews, and we'll also bring in Barry Murphy into the panel to answer some of your questions. And we also have a special guest, Mohammed, who is an alumni of Barry's charity, and Barry mentioned earlier. And congratulations, Mohammed, in your new role as well. So at this point, we're going to start the Q&A. Thank you all for the great questions so far on Slido. Just to note, we are moderating the questions behind the scenes to ensure every panelist gets a fair share of airtime. And you can still add them in there and you can still upvote. So just please keep the questions coming. And any that go unanswered, we'll follow up with the community to try and provide answers after the meeting. Okay, so Mara, please invite okay, we've invited Barry Murphy in now, and I can see Mohammed as well. Welcome to the panel. So first of all, we have a question from Charlotte Hillenbrand to you, Professor Kanter. And Charlotte's asking, what advice do you have for rapidly building a shared vision for cross-sector stakeholders to commit to?
Thank you very much. And by the way, thank you for this opportunity. I found the entire thing very path-breaking, and I hope to applaud your progress and hear about it. So I would say that's a great question, Charlotte. The word rapidly, though, may be a bit of a problem because it requires patient telling the story again and again and again. And like all great sales processes, you sell one-on-one rather than in groups. Often you don't convene a group until you're pretty clear where everybody stands. And so if it's inefficient to do it one by one, yet people like one-on-one. They like being heard and listened to, their organization's interests, their own interests, And so what the intrepid innovators that I write about, that I mentor, that I help do, is they keep at it. They keep visiting people. They visit them in their own settings, which may be difficult now, but we'll find a proxy for that. They learn about their interests. Torsten Thiel, the oceans guy, Thiele, would often offer to help before he would ask. He would find out the agenda of the organizations he was talking to, and he would offer to help. And then he would gradually introduce his vision, his ideas. And so it's a process over time. It's not something that happens instantly. You can accelerate it, of course, if you write a lot and you are in essence crowdsourcing. That is, you're finding out who responds to what you put out there and write, and you have to find room for all of them. But for the core of your coalition, you need people who are truly dedicated and who have skills. I mean, these coalitions, I know there's another question about making this practical, a day-to-day operational reality. Practically, you need a core team that has the range of skills that are going to bring it forward. Often they're paid, not just volunteers, but sometimes they start out as volunteers. And then you have lots of groups in a circle around you. And you have to make sure that each one of those groups feel like they are benefiting. So the vision has to be a big enough umbrella that many people can stand under it, and that this umbrella helps them accomplish their goals while they join together to help you accomplish yours. I know I just packed a lot into that answer, but think about giving before getting. Think about helping many organizations accomplish their goal. Think about constantly enlarging the circles without diluting the focus. And finally, keep communicating to your allies and partners. One mistake people make in the middle is they spend all their time thinking about the opposition, the critics, and they stop communicating to the people that support them. You've got to communicate to your supporters all the time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor Kanter. The next question's targeted at Barry Matthews, so make sure you're unmuted, Barry. This is from Michelle Lord. She says, how do we get more organisations to embrace collaborative, ambitious and radical approaches to thinking and acting together to challenge systemic inequalities?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. How do you get people to work together? Well, get rid of bloody ego. I absolutely hate ego, and I hate a desire to own a social issue. So nobody owns social mobility, and that's why I have a concern about a social mobility index, which ranks people in terms of who's doing best at when it comes to tackling the issues that hopefully we're going to identify and message out to a wider audience through the Esma project. So I think the first step is to get everybody who wants to do something to accept that they don't have the silver bullet, and actually the only way in which one can create real change is to act in a collaborative manner and showcase that. So thankfully we've got a good example of that that's been working since 2017 in the charity. And SMBP isn't a large charity. It's 2.6 FTE. We had an operating budget of less than £250,000 a year, which is funded by 23 corporates, putting in between 5 and 15K. But what it is a facilitator, and the delivery is done by the various organizations working in collaboration. So I think in terms of cutting through the crap, as it were, sorry, I'm doing pretty well in my language today. It's about showcasing the reach and the scale you can achieve if you don't go ahead on your own and look to seek to get the plaudits of being the person who's done the most in this space. And by evidencing that through things like we're doing, and there's other organizations who've got the same attitude, but it's not a competition. When a child succeeds, that child's success is their own. We're one piece in the jigsaw. And I think actually, if Mohammed's on the call, it'd be really interesting for him to reflect on that, having just achieved all against all odds, what will be an amazing career. Super human being.
Fantastic. Well, Mohammed, do you want to comment on that quickly?
Well, firstly, thank you, Cain, and thank you, Barry. I really appreciate your kind words and for the amazing session. But actually, what Barry said, and effectively the impact of the SMBP on me, it's something which I've thought about a lot over the years. And actually, the answer I give has evolved and developed a lot, because often I'll have situations where I'll look back and realize that actually the reaction I had to something in a certain situation was often down to the impact of the SMBP. But ultimately, in essence, I believe that the impact SMBP had on me, it can effectively be concluded into two things. Firstly, access. The SMBP, it gave me an access into the corporate world, and not just entering offices, which of course I'll come back to later, but it's not something which it should be overlooked, but the smaller things which are often not considered. And so, for example, I come from a family where no one in my immediate or extended family has ever had to commute into work using the underground. It's always been in our banged up cars. So suddenly I needed to navigate the tube system and be amongst the commuters at the 9 a.m. rush hour and at 6, 7 p.m. 100% definitely overrated, but it was something I had to get used to. And then also just going into the office, which meant that I needed to go out, buy formal attire. And actually one of the things that I enjoyed most was going into these places and learning some fashion tips from the marvelously dressed employees. But at the firms, you know, their ties, their suits, their cufflinks, their shoes, just everything. I was constantly in awe. But even the access to the offices and the corporate life, going in and exploring an office, becoming acquainted with big London buildings like the Walkie Talkie or the Shard, or even just getting used to the tea and coffee provisions and how I had to pour myself a cup of tea. It was all new to me, but now I don't get intimidated or overwhelmed by those offices or by those situations, because actually I've been there and done that. And it's something that was an experience which was so priceless. But secondly, and it sort of links in, which it was more the normalization process, where actually everything slowly became more and more normal for me. And it instilled a sense of resilience. And people have sort of, they've listened to me, they've accepted me. And I started to realize that actually my story was my story, and it was unbelievably powerful. I am who I am. So I should own it. I should be proud of it. And the resilience training which SMBP give, where every single one of the students on the scheme spends a day at a professional sports club and learns about resilience, it promoted exactly that. So from that day onwards, I never backed away or was shy of telling my story. So long story short, it changed my life.
Oh, that's incredible to hear. Thank you for sharing, Mohammed. Right, the next question's for Barry Murphy, and it's asked by Marcus Simmons. So how are you approaching the current remote working environment with regard to social mobility? Aside from digital access, housing, for example, is a real issue here.
Wow, that's a massive question in itself. So thank you for raising it. And when you say how are we approaching it, I suppose with regard to Esma and some of the people we collaborate with, you've got campaigns like Future.now and Device.now, which were addressing access, not only in terms of a huge amount of people at home, particularly school issues, where there is no laptop or other provision in the houses. How do we deal with that? And how do we borrow responses we've seen work in other countries? Issues about access to Wi-Fi, looking for more zero-rated sites, that's part of it. But also looking for physical spaces that people can actually do what they need to do in, be it school or work, because that's not always possible in people's current home environment. You know, I was struck by what Mohammed said there is, can't start to fix a problem unless we start to see the world through other people's eyes enough. And this COVID crisis and remote working is starting to get us to all understand more about that. And one of the biggest things that most of the employers I'm talking to have put a lot more attention on, maybe they should have had it before, Cain, is mental well-being and that mental resilience piece, you know, the sense of isolation. And if we're talking about social mobility and entrenched disadvantage, boy, if I felt isolated and disadvantaged before, my world has got even more closed in this virtual space. So we're looking to work with councils, with employers and others and schools to look at how we stop missing a generation. It's a hackney phrase, I know at the moment, but it kind of captures it. We could miss a generation, and we've got to join up to stop that happening. I hope that went some way towards answering a question which probably would require a panel of its own for a day.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thanks, Barry, for that insight. We can set up another panel just for you for that question, if you like.
On my own.
Okay, the next question's for you, Sam. As a tech expert, what role do you think technology and your peers can play in making the UK and the world a fairer, better and more sustainable place?
It really comes down to the reach and the impact that a digital tool or software can aid. So we can help messages spread faster. We can help more complex messages spread with higher fidelity presentation of information. And those are really the things that, like the digital tool isn't going to solve the problem. There's still going to be a lot of human work to be done, but it can certainly get information to the right place and the right messages in the right place at the right time, and to more places at a lower cost.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, another question for you, Professor Kanter. Do the coalitions that really work all have a key driving figure for people to form around? So the Oceans example that you gave had a key figurehead. Is that key?
Yes, thank you for that question and insight and observation. Not necessarily one, it might be two or three. But yes, because there needs to be a driving force. Now, that driving force, the so-called charismatic leader, is important to keep embodying the purpose and to continue to persist and continue to hold the coalition together. But I think one of the keys to sustaining an innovation is to share that role with many other people, is to begin to divide into areas and have people who are the driving force in those areas. And sometimes there are people who might be the successor to that leader. But yes, these are social movements. You have to think of them as social movements who do need charismatic leaders embodying the purpose. And, Max Weber once said, the great sociologist long time ago, that every charismatic leader gave way to an administrator and an agitator. That is, you needed a chief operating officer, and you also needed somebody who kept the message going and kept whipping up people's enthusiasm to continue to belong. I've been working recently on a case, not in my book, Think Outside the Building, but I hope you'll read the stories that are in my book, but a case on a coalition in Chicago, a very elaborate, complex coalition dedicated to ending inequality, working on racial justice, ending the death gap, which is the longevity issues and the health and wealth issues. And one of the issues they're facing just a couple of years into it, even though people love this, first of all, the work is harder than anybody thought, and there are stumbles along the way, things that have to be redirected, but also the initial coalition was represented. So 6 hospitals were at the core, plus many banks and community residents and so forth. But the people who had those institutions turn over. And so while the hospital may have been committed, the bank may have been committed, what did that mean exactly? It meant some individuals who championed it, and they have to be replaced. So you have to find other people within your partner organization. So you do have to have that charismatic force to keep selling and have it embodied by one person. That person may not have a big ego, may not want to be known as the face of the organization, but yet that really does matter. You don't have to be an autocrat, but you do have to be a symbol.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to really going to have to up my game as the charismatic face of Mission Beyond, aren't I? We've got another question for you.
I can give you tips.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
I have a whole chapter on. I have a whole chapter on telling the right story. How do we tell stories to engage people? Anyway, sorry, go on.
We've got another question for you, actually, Professor Kanter. You alluded to it. It's from Harriet Green, who's the ex-CEO of IBM Asia Pacific. And she says, can you comment on the combinational force of vision and dreaming with operational brilliance to avoid the worst excesses of very messy middles?
Oh, thank you, Harriet, and how nice to hear from you. Well, yes, you do need that combination. You do need operational excellence, because if it doesn't work, you can assemble people, you can have noble goals, but then it has to work in practice. And so you want to make sure that your first iteration, first of all, your first proof of concept, it's very important that it all works, but it's easy to write it off because, oh, well, maybe that was unique. It's the second replication that really matters, and you can't replicate exactly the way you did it the first time. You have to be flexible enough to modify it for the circumstances, whether that's a different city, a different school, a different employer, a different country. So operational excellence, absolutely important, but you can't let operational excellence drive everything. That is, you can't give it over to the technocrats. Excuse me, Sam, I know you're not a technocrat. I know that we need people who understand the importance of the mission and are driven to make sure that every demonstration has in it the seeds of what the mission is. The other important principle I use is build in to your first iteration everything you'd like to be eventually. For example, if you'd like a lot of diversity, you build it in from the beginning. You can't say, well, we'll try it, and then later on we'll reach out to diverse people. And similarly with operational excellence, you begin building the systems for replication right in the beginning. You start documenting everything and reviewing it and seeing how it can be improved. So I think that's a perfect combination, but the operational excellence comes a little later, I think, if you don't have the charismatic leadership to inspire and entice, you can't even get off the ground. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you, Professor Kanter. The next question is from Claire Wardle, and I'm going to ask you, Barry Matthews. There are many initiatives in this space, and I'm presuming this space means social mobility in this context. How do we join them up?
You're going to have to unmute me again, Mara, if you're... Yep.
We can hear you. Yeah.
How do we join them up? Well, Esma, that's how we join them up, because Esma is not an initiative. It's been set up for one purpose alone, is to stop those initiatives being passing ships in the night. So, as I said, our first phase is to enable people to get their hands around the issue of low income from cradle to grave, or from cradle through to retirement. And from that point on, people can then identify their passion for the particular issue, whichever life stage they want to focus on. And then, armed with that knowledge and that passion, look to see what's already happening. And so the phase 2 operational map, which Sam alluded to, the call to arms for all of you developers are on the call. We need help to build that. We've got an architecture in terms of the co-op have done something around well-being, which they're happy to white label license it, but we need to augment that to enable us to map the social and mobility initiatives that we're working on. And we've already done a proof of concept. So the gathering of the information, the assessment of information has already been done to iron out any wrinkles, but we need a team of developers to help with that. So that phase 2 will be an interactive map of the UK. You can zone in on your part of the country. You can see which initiatives are working together, whether that be state, third sector and business. There will be embedded into those summaries recommendations, so an operational assessment on how things can be better. And from that, we're looking therefore to present very easy answers for those initiatives to starting working more collaboratively, more efficiently. I think the easiest way I could describe it, think about social mobility as a PLC or a FTSE 5 or a Fortune 500 company. Think about it having 5 divisions. The first division being early years, the final division being progression through work. And think about individuals being the product which that organization sells. And that product moves through each division in terms of its life cycle, in terms of generation of revenue. What we're trying to do in each division is identify how the 3 teams that make up that division, state, business, and third sector, can work more efficiently. And that's what the drive is, to map an operational review. And then that got icing on the cake that I mentioned earlier, is to then identify the best of and say, right, here's a license fee. We're commercially remunerate you for your effort and your intellectual property, but we'll take that for that commercially justifiable fee, and we will then make that available to others like you on a free Creative Commons basis. So that there'll be a cross-fertilization of best practice. So we're taking all the best bits of business and applying it to the social issue. And so there's 2 things in there: development in terms of that mapping tool, and the call to arms to be the individual researchers, because this isn't just about grafting data from websites. It's about grey matter analysis of what could work better at a local level, at a regional level, and at a national level.
May I add something?
Sure, absolutely.
Oh, thank you, because I think that sounds fantastic. And taking those best practices and being so systematic about it, that sounds fantastic. So the one thing I want to add is relationships. People respond to people. And so one of the reasons you get lots of organizations on your side is that people feel known and included. The same thing we want for the students we're trying to help, is that people feel known, their identity is clear, they feel valued and honored, and credit is shared. The Chicago huge complex coalition, so many things can go wrong, that if people feel it's owned by somebody else and they could drop out and no one would care, it doesn't matter. This idea of always sharing the credit and working on the people side and the relation side. That's all I would add, because you've got a fabulous process.
Yeah, well, that's really key, Rosabeth. And I think that's the thing about Esma. It's a coalition of individuals. You don't have to be an organization to join it. You can be an individual and put your hat into the ring. And equally, those groups that are going to, there'll be study groups that will take early years, and they will be the people who own that analysis and present it to a panel. We've managed to get the great and the good from third sector, business, and state to come and listen to these presentations and then make the recommendations and apply the Incubator Fund. But those individuals who are actually doing the work will get the credit for the work. Absolutely. This is look, we're literally, your book is our manifesto. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you both. Just relating to that then, we've also got a question again for you, Professor Kanter, from Natalie Wharton, on the subject of people and relationships. What have you seen work with energizing and motivating people in the middle of a project? And I think she's highlighted middle, so it's kind of alluding to the messy middle there.
Yeah, well, middles definitely are miserable. So first you have to look into yourself. Are you still motivated? You have to make sure that you can carry the dream and the passion forward. Because if you look tired, if your spirits are sagging, if you would rather move on to something else, it's going to be hard to energize anybody else. The second is, I'm a big believer in the power of convening, of the energy of everybody seeing everybody else. Zoom actually makes it possible to see all those Zoom screens. I mean, I wish I had been able to see the faces of the 120 or so people on Zoom now. It is fantastic to have people share their stories and feel the connection and the mutual energy, the mutual spirit. We don't energize ourselves, we do that through one another. Then third one is the ability to rethink certain premises and engage people in that rethinking. During the pandemic, getting people over the hump involves a lot of operational fixes, doing things differently in your company or your organization, And that involves asking the people at the grassroots, what do they think could be done differently or better? And nothing energizes people like being asked, being involved, having a chance to participate. And so that's another thing, engage people in that repair work that you have to do in order to be ready for the future, and then constantly keep the vision in front of people. It's not just understood, you say it again and again and again, and then you thank people profusely. The one thing managers often forget to do is say thank you. And you just say it as often as possible through as many forums as possible.
Fantastic, thank you. There's been so many good questions that the answers are definitely going to feed into how we evolve the operating model of Mission Beyond itself. We've got 3 minutes. I'm just going to wrap up now. I think that's all of the questions, all of the time that we've got available for the questions. Thank you to everyone for your time today, and thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Professor Kanter. Thank you, Barry, for sharing your personal stories. It's been brilliant. I hope the community, I hope you've all been inspired, learned something new, and have seen that we do have the tools and skills to make a difference together. And we would love for more of you to be involved, and we'll be in touch to set up the next stage of conversations. We'll also send out an email with all of the content from today, and we'll invite you to be a part of this growing community. I think we had about 120 attendees today, and a similar number in the previous one, so that we validated that lots of people want to be involved. And as I said previously, you know, if you want to receive a copy of this brilliant book, when you log off of Zoom, you'll be presented with a survey. If you fill that out and fill in the address field, you will have this book arrive in the post. So thank you everyone for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.